speaker. Now the time's come. And this gentleman is superintendent of the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, WISD. He has quite an interesting long resume, and I just tried to pick out a few things that I feel are most relevant at the moment. For example, he led the consolidation transition team for the new Ypsilanti Community Schools and served as a dual superintendent during the 2013-14 school year. I see he was a board member of the United Way of Washtenaw County and Ypsi Rotary Club, named Executive of the Year by the MLive Ann Arbor News in 2014, honored as Superintendent of the Year for Michigan Region 8 in 2014, and I think you'll find what he has to say very interesting tonight. Can I introduce Scott Menzel?
Really short. So first I want to thank Pam for inviting me to speak with you this evening, and I also want to acknowledge I've got my board member Diane Hockett here, and then tip of the hat to Sherry Van Adder. I was surprised she didn't get elected to something. And Steve Olson, so colleagues in education, people that we work with closely. And two topics to discuss tonight. The first one will be the conversation between Dexter and Whitmore Lake relating to annexation, and the second is the May 5th ballot proposal. And so what I'll do is just provide a little bit of context with respect to the annexation conversation, open it up for questions, and then turn to the other topic if that's okay. So, how many of you are familiar with the annexation discussion? How many of you were familiar with the Ann Arbor Whitmore Lake conversation? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time except for to say that those conversations all surfaced out of a meeting between two board members, one from Ann Arbor, one from Whitmore Lake, as Whitmore Lake was looking at its financial position as a small district that was getting smaller on a regular basis. In fact, since 2009-10, they've lost about 30% of their student enrollment. A lot of it's just because people moved out of Whitmore Lake. Some of it's due to school of choice, but most of it's because people have moved out. They didn't, during the economic recession in 2008, they lost a lot of residents, people moving away from the area. And when you're a small district already, and you know I was superintendent of Whitmore Lake for 5 years, from 2002 to 2007, we were at 1,300 when I left, and now they're at 936 students. Because school funding is driven by the number of students we have, creates a downward spiral. When you're losing kids, you have to cut your budget, which means you have to cut staff, you have to seek concessionary contracts, you have to eliminate programs. There are a lot of things that are associated with that, and Whitmore Lake is a community that really has a lot of pride in what they're able to offer and what they're able to do as a small school. But there comes a time where you also have to face the reality. The reality is that the way Michigan funds its schools is really problematic for small schools that are declining enrollment. And rather than go forward into a potential deficit, they decided to be proactive and try to find another way to address the financial concerns. If you look at the Ypsilanti-Willow Run consolidation, they were both deficit districts, spiraling out of control, significant deficit for a decade. In both cases, the districts were deficit spending for that long period of time. And academically, they were struggling. Their choice was to consolidate or to have the state appoint an emergency manager or someone else to take over the schools. And so, very different situation with respect to the annexation conversation between Ann Arbor and Whitmore Lake. Not to belabor the point, I can answer the questions later, but because of Ann Arbor's hold harmless status, where they levy a separate mill, 4.4 mills, to be able to get $9,100 per student, and Whitmore Lake is at the foundation minimum of $7,251 per student. They had to pursue annexation with a mutual assumption of debt. So there's an option in an annexation scenario of sharing debt or keeping debt separate. And that's part of what gets everything complicated. People don't understand why in the Ann Arbor-Whitmore Lake situation, the voters in both communities voted, whereas in the conversation between Dexter and Whitmore Lake, that's not on the table. And the reason why it's not on the table is because there's no advantage to sharing debt between Whitmore Lake and Dexter. The advantage in the Ann Arbor situation was that Ann Arbor, as an out-of-formula district, is levying 5.4 mills more than Whitmore Lake was paying, plus if they retained their own debt payments, their tax increase in Whitmore Lake would have been almost 7 mills. You could have put it on the ballot, but I don't believe that Whitmore Lake ever would have approved it. Because of the large tax base in Ann Arbor, that made sense because it was a $0.25 mil uptick for homeowners in Ann Arbor. It was a small decrease in the net taxes for Whitmore Lake homeowners, but they would have all been paying the same rate, and they would have been leveraging $1,800 more per student. So at the end of the day, school finance is driven by the number of kids we have. And so you're always counting the number of students. And in Michigan, we're declining. So it wasn't too long ago, and we had 1.7 million students in the state. Then it was 1.6. We're now under 1.5 million students in the state of Michigan. So we're competing for a shrinking pool of kids that we can count. And that's what drives our economic engine. So for Whitmore Lake, they're not likely to grow their way out of their current financial challenges in terms of operating expenses. They've been very proactive. They're not deficit. They closed the middle school. They've done things in order to ensure they don't become deficit. At the same time, that means that class sizes have grown. They've had to reduce what they're able to offer students in the community. And so that's a concern for them. And so they're looking for ways to be able to address that. After the Ann Arbor Whitmore Lake proposal failed in November, there was a conversation, because during this process I was asked by people in Dexter, well, why not Dexter? So it was not Whitmore Lake approaching Dexter, it was people in Dexter who came to me and said, why not Dexter as a partner with Whitmore Lake? And I said, well, initially the conversation when I was first approached by the Whitmore board member saying, you know, can we begin to have a conversation here? I said, well, why not? I asked the question, why not Dexter? Well, the economics actually are most advantageous with Ann Arbor because there's no other way to leverage $1,800 more per student than to partner with an out-of-formula district. It made a lot of sense. Dexter's the third highest foundation grant in the county. So Whitmore Lake is at $7,251 if you include the equity payment. Dexter's at $7,569 per student, so it's $300 more per kid that they get in Dexter than they do in Whitmore Lake. So if you were to combine the two districts through annexation, you're leveraging an additional $420,000 in operating costs. At the same time, you're eliminating redundant positions. You have one superintendent, not two. You have one business office, not two. You have one tech department, not two. So we can get some economies of scale. Annexation is a desirable solution in a lot of cases around the state, but one where we don't have enough incentives at the state level to get people to actually move in that direction. I want to take just a minute to talk about the difference between consolidation and annexation, because I think it's really important. In consolidation, the two former districts, or however many consolidate, disappear and a new organization is formed. So Ypsilanti ceased to exist as a public school district, Willow Run ceased to exist, and they created Ypsilanti Community Schools. They merged and emerged as a new entity. And in their situation, they needed to be able to hit the reset button. They actually wanted to rebrand themselves because of the history. They didn't want to lose all of their history, but they needed to kind of turn the corner in terms of achievement and public confidence in the school system. In the case of Ann Arbor and Whitmore Lake, Ann Arbor's never going to give up its individual identity. Dexter doesn't have a need to give up its individual identity. So to come to the table and have a conversation about annexation means one of the parties needs to be willing to forego its individual identity as an independent school district and join itself to a larger entity that's not going to lose its identity. Dexter's a solvent district, got a solid reputation academically. Because of the funding model, this can create a win-win scenario for both the Dexter School District and Whitmore Lake. What if you're paying attention to some of the quotes from Whitmore Lake board members, especially one who was a retired teacher, he said, look, at the end of the day, I don't need my board seat here at Whitmore Lake. But what we do want is we want our kids to be educated in the schools that are located here in the community. It doesn't matter who the school board is, it doesn't matter that structure. What matters is a quality educational experience for our kids in this community. They weren't pursuing annexation to have their buildings closed down and kids shipped off to other places. It was a way to be able to leverage resources more effectively, and it was a willingness to say, it's not about governing this really small school system that probably isn't going to be able to survive forever. Let's be proactive and find a partner so we can offer high-quality educational experiences for our students. That conversation happened in Ann Arbor. It's the same conversation that's happening with Dexter. Initially, we were convening ad hoc committees from both school districts to have this conversation, but what became apparent is that there are a whole lot of questions by the Dexter community. And it kind of surfaced quickly. There was a lot of misinformation that circulated about something was going to happen very quickly, and we had to rush to stop it. The Dexter board never had any intention of moving rapidly in this conversation. They've always had the intention of having a deliberate conversation, answering some really specific questions about what's in it for our kids, what's in it for our community. Is it financially viable? What's the risk associated with doing it? So that if and when they ever decide to have a vote on annexing Whitmore Lake, they'll be able to answer those questions. They'll have some degree of confidence with respect to what the community's preferences are. But from an ISD perspective, I think these are really important conversations to have. Because at the end of the day, public education is important. Can I see how many people here support public education? I thought so. Just wanted to make sure. And the problem is the way public education is structured currently in Michigan, it's constantly pitting school against school, competing for fewer resources. So because we're tied to the number of kids in chairs and we've expanded school of choice and we've uncapped charter schools, we've created conditions that really will see this story play out time and time again. But if we can be proactive in Washtenaw County, if we can think about strategies and solutions to address this that leverage more resources, because we would be getting more money for the 936 kids in Whitmore Lake if an annexation went through. I think that's a good thing. We're not going to get it from Lansing. At least it doesn't appear to be anytime soon that we're going to get it from Lansing. So we can do some things on our own in Washtenaw County to help do that. We don't have to redistrict, and this is one of the things that the Dexter board has said. We're not planning on redrawing the boundaries between Dexter and Whitmore Lake. I had a parent call me very upset from Dexter saying he lived closer to Whitmore and didn't want his kid. I bought in Dexter because I wanted my kids to go to Dexter. And the board has said, look, we're not redistricting, you know, where kids go based on the current boundaries. We want to protect that as part of the conversation. But what I think is really important for people to understand is that this is a slow-moving train, not a fast-moving train. And Doug, you told us that this was not a fast-moving train that just went by. And when you see a fast-moving train, you'll be in awe, apparently. So I'm happy to answer questions. I think from a county perspective, we want to leverage as many dollars as we can for the kids in public education. We want to ensure that every child, whether they're in the 48189 zip code, which is Whitmore Lake, or in the Dexter zip code, or in the Ypsilanti zip code, has access to a high-quality public education experience. This is a unique opportunity to do some things. We got a lot of work to do in order to take advantage of the laws that exist, while at the same time we're working to change the laws in order to create better opportunities for our students. I'm happy to answer questions about annexation. Doug.
Speaking of scheduling, if this thing stays on track, and the school boards manage to remain engaged, what school year do you think that this might actually take place?
So, because of Michigan election laws, there are only 4 times a year we can vote. And the statute around annexation says that it takes place at a date set in the ballot or within a few days of the annexation. So what will typically take place is that, and it was the case in Ann Arbor, that you would set the date of the effectiveness of the annexation in the ballot proposal that Whitmore Lake would be voting on. That is likely to be the beginning of a school year. It doesn't make sense to do it any other time, and it just creates all sorts of complicating variables. So July 1st of 2016 would probably be the very earliest that you'd see it. If you had a vote in August of 2015 or November of 2015 or even February of 2016,
roll over 16 anyway.
Right, so it's going to be July 1st of 2016 at the soonest that you would move in that direction.
So it will have to be voted on no matter what we
do. Yeah, so annexation requires the proposing board, so the Dexter board, to vote to annex Whitmore Lake, and then the community of Whitmore Lake to vote to be annexed. And that's in statute. It doesn't provide for options for both communities to vote, and there's some reasons for that. One is you're enlarging the boundaries of a district, and you've got a board already in place that's been elected by the public to be able to carry that out. If there's mutual assumption of debt, it has an impact on taxpayers. And so whenever there's money That has to be voted by all the parties. Whitmore as a community has to vote because they're giving up all their assets. So every school building, all the assets of the district get turned over to Dexter. And the Whitmore taxpayers are still on the hook for everything that's still owed. And so their whole community has to approve it because of the tax implications for them. They're giving up the ownership rights of all those assets while they're still going to remain responsible for paying off the remaining debt. Other questions?
So how will that affect the Whitmore Lake taxpayers? They're still going to be paying their millage for their schools. Are they going to be paying millage for Dexter's schools in addition? Or?
No. So the debt retirement remains separate for Dexter and Whitmore Lake based on the current debt obligations. If in the future there's a new bond issue or a sinking fund, that gets levied uniformly across both districts. But all former debt remains separate until it's paid off. There is a provision in statute where after 3 years you could go to the voters and seek to blend it. There's really no compelling reason to do that.
Why did they look at Dexter and not like maybe South Lyon, which is also a very big growing community?
It's a big growing community, but it's a part of a different intermediate school district. There's no financial advantage. South Lyon is also a low-funded district. They're at the bottom of the funding tier. So there's no benefit to them. There's no economic plus. So if you partner with a district that's getting more per student, then you're leveraging additional operating dollars. South Lyon is at the same foundation grant level as Whitmore Lake, so there's no financial benefit. Same is true for Pinckney, and it's also a deficit district, so it's really difficult to hitch your wagon to someone that's in the hole. And Brighton is a deficit district. They get a little bit more than the foundation minimum, but not a lot. And both of those are also in a different ISD. Yes, Bob. I think it's Bob, right?
Yes. The voters in Whitmore Lake, you said all of them need to vote, but they don't all have to vote yes, it just has to be a majority vote?
Correct.
Thank you.
They had, in the Ann Arbor situation, on a November ballot, it was 72% yes. And there are good reasons for that. I'm not sure you'd get that high of a percentage in the Dexter situation. You'd probably get a little bit more balance. But at the end of the day, this is just a reality check. How long can a small district with declining enrollment remain independent? And you gotta know, I was there when we built the new high school. And it was at a time where we had proposed growth that didn't materialize. It was at a time, and the high school wasn't built for that growth, but we were looking at the proposal for economic development at North Territorial and 23. That corridor would at least create stable enrollment. Then 2008 hit, and no one expected that we would have the bottom fall out quite like that. So it's very difficult because as a small school superintendent, there are a lot of advantages. Parents, many of them will choose that over the larger school because they don't want their kids to get lost. And so that option is really nice to have. It's just difficult to remain a separate, independent school district in this environment.
Are other school districts around the state looking at consolidation, annexation? One question. And the other big elephant in the room, Proposal A. What's the future of Proposal A and how's that going to be?
Good questions, ma'am. So the answer is, according to one of the bond attorneys who worked with us on the Ann Arbor Whitmore Lake conversation, she said in the last 10 years, they have had a lot of requests to pursue annexation. But every time it got stopped because there weren't enough incentives for the annexing district. One of the things that we got changed in statute was the way the formula is calculated for consolidation and annexation. We got that changed to benefit the Ypsilanti Willow Run case, so it's a weighted blended plus $100 per student. That change is helpful, but it doesn't go far enough because it's the lesser of, not the greater of. So there are districts that have looked at it, but without some additional incentive, they just don't take the next step. So that's been part of our argument with elected officials is that we need to sweeten the pot a little bit. If you truly believe we've got too many independent schools and that money can be better spent, instead of on the redundant administration, better spent in classrooms and ensuring class sizes are appropriate and making sure we've got that breadth of educational opportunities for students, then we need to create the incentive. With respect to Proposal A, I haven't heard any appetite for opening that up completely. I would argue that actually after 20 years, it's probably about the right time to have another Blue Ribbon Commission tackle the question of school funding. I think there's a sliver of hope here, Pam, because the governor signed, I think it's Public Act 423 or Senate Bill 423, the Public Act might have a different number, but it's an adequacy study. That was part of the road deal. Even though it's not tie-barred, it was finalized during that process where by next January, there will be an adequacy study to determine what it takes to provide the level of education guaranteed by Michigan's Constitution. And the language is very prescriptive in the statute in terms of looking at the impact of poverty, impact of kids with disabilities, the impact of some of the other variables that can increase or cause some variability in costs for educating students in Michigan and delivering the kinds of outcomes that we expect. That adequacy study, if it turns out like it has in many other states where it looks like we're underfunding public education, the courts in other states have gotten involved and told their states they needed to remedy the funding situation because they were out of compliance with the state's constitution. That might be the window that allows us to revisit Proposal A and how school funding is structured.
That's a good segue into the road.
Perfect. Because I'll talk all night, or until my voice gives out. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cold. But the May 5th ballot proposal, while it's ostensibly about roads, is about a whole lot more than that. So for me, I call it investing in our infrastructure. And it's infrastructure in two ways. One, it's our physical infrastructure of our roads and bridges, which are absolutely prerequisite to achieving prosperity in the state of Michigan. We can't expect to retain and attract quality employers if we don't have a solid infrastructure. So road funding was a top priority for the governor. The proposal we have in front of us wasn't the preferred proposal, not by the governor, not by the Senate, not by many of us in the room, but it is a compromise that has some tremendous potential. And what I would say, given that we're in a very friendly room here, is the Democrats got a whole lot more in exchange for their votes to put this on the ballot than a lot of people ever thought possible. And so that is actually something that should be applauded because they were at the table in the room and were able to get something more than they otherwise might have been able to get given the minority status in both the House and the Senate. The kick for schools, so infrastructure number two, is that the education system is really the core infrastructure. It's our physical infrastructure and our talent. It's that pipeline of kids through the school system into college and careers that are going to actually help ensure that we're a prosperous state. What the funding proposal does is changes the Constitution in some significant ways. Doug could talk about all the nuances on the road side, so I'm not going to pretend to be the expert, except for I know this, that the sales tax goes up by 1%, from 6% to 7%. Although when you read the ballot language, it's really going up from 4 to 5% because there's 2% set aside for School Aid Act, and all of a sudden eyes glaze over and you say, I don't understand this. It goes from 6 to 7%. It also protects the school aid fund. Right now, the school aid fund has been used not only to fund K-12 education, but community colleges and universities. There's a constitutional change in the ballot proposal that will restrict how the school aid fund can be used so that it can no longer be used to fund universities. We've got about $200 million from the school aid fund right now that's being used to fund universities. It will still allow school aid fund to be used for community colleges and for public career and tech ed programs. So it's expanded beyond K-12, so you'd say pre-K through 14 instead of the more expansive definition now, but it's movement in the right direction. It doesn't stop some of the shell games, but it will result in protecting the school aid fund in some significant ways. Additionally, if approved, there's $300 million more revenue for our schools as a result of the increase in the sales tax. $300 million more in the school aid fund equates to about $200 more per pupil. So if I were to ask you to vote, how many of you think the legislature is going to increase appropriations for schools?
Not this legislature.
How many think that they're going to raid the school aid fund in order to cover the general fund shortfall? How many are concerned about the rate of the school aid fund in order to cover the general fund's shortfall, right? So we've got some concerns here. The ballot proposal, from my perspective, I'm speaking only personally from my perspective, may not be perfect, but it is a move in the right direction. We can't delay any longer addressing infrastructure issues on our roads. Not only does it impact all of us, but it impacts our buses and the safe school transportation, getting kids to and from school. That's a major concern. We had a bus that was on icy roads, and it wasn't because they were not properly maintained. They were icy, and it can happen. But you hit a big pothole, you have something that goes out on a bus, that's a serious concern. And we take that obligation seriously, anyone who's working in public education. So we need the roads to be in a much better position than they are now. We need the investment in education for our kids to be at an appropriate level. This is a kickstart in the right direction. And we wouldn't have been able to get the support if it didn't also include moving the earned income tax credit from the 6% back to the 20% of what the IRS allows, so that, because the sales tax is a regressive tax, and normally we'd oppose that kind of thing. But the financial analysis that I've heard and read from the Michigan League for Public Policy is that because of the reinstatement of the earned income tax credit, individuals who are low and middle income will come out better than they would if that earned income tax credit remained at its current 6%. So I'm happy to answer questions about perceived impact on schools or what people are thinking about in terms of the May 5th ballot proposal. My concern is this. In May, voter turnout is low, typically, and people who are opposed typically are more motivated than people who support. And so there's a very short window for getting the word out, explaining to people what's in the ballot proposal. There's some interesting side notes that are taking place in terms of why people will oppose this. Even the chamber is not sure where its membership is going to land on this. How many of you are going to be able to go to the headline lunch tomorrow that the chamber has with the MDOT director, Doug? At least pay attention to the news reports, because I think it will be real important to be fully informed. But then we have to mobilize people if we think this is the next best step in terms of public policy.
That's my next question. What stakeholders are coming to the table to work together to on this ballot proposal?
So the school lobby, the school groups, the Michigan Association of School Boards, the Michigan Association of School Administrators, the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Administrators are all putting money into the campaign. The MEA is not going to put money in the campaign, but I did talk to Steve Cook, and he said that they would very likely get involved with their membership to mobilize people. Okay. Coffers are dry is what Steve said, so there's not a lot of money there. The rest of the coalition, I'm not sure. I've been told that the governor's proposal and whoever he's been bringing money in from should be unveiled by Friday this week.
I don't mean to appear stupid, but it's a question I've always wondered. If the roads are in a failing condition as badly as they are, where did the money come from in the first place that we don't have and now need to generate?
It's a gas tax. Is that what you mean?
I thought, and again, I can be really silly and not know that, but I thought we had a sales tax before that went up to 6% to cover that.
No, that was for schools. That 2% increase on the sales tax was dedicated to the school aid fund.
My bad.
Right. So the other part of the sales tax is that's on gasoline and fuel. Part of that goes to fund roads, but not all of it.
Very low. Yeah. Usually it's Act 51 provides for the transportation fund, and it's basically funded through the gasoline tax, which hasn't been changed since 1997. So even though the price of gas fluctuates, that sales tax, the gasoline tax, I should call it,
it's 19 cents, right,
goes into this funnel where approximately 1/3 goes for state roads, 1/3 goes for county roads, and 1/3 goes for your city roads, approximately. And there's 10% supposedly for public transit, which doesn't happen. Talking about funds getting rid.
Right, exactly.
But so that's been pretty much the structure, and basically the legislature has not been willing to increase the gasoline tax, and so hence we end up with this sales tax proposal.
But on the flip side, what's nice about this proposal is it strips away the 19 cents on the fuel at the pump, and it taxes at a rate of 14.5% average wholesale cost for gas and diesel in a way that is dedicated just for roads. So the tax that's getting applied is dedicated to roads, and so you don't have
Which you
this
don't have right now.
Why is some of the money going to roads and some going to schools and some going to municipalities? It creates clearer lanes for how that money is generated and what it's used to support.
So it's been broke a long time.
It has been broke a long time.
Something in the order of at least 50 years.
And the 1.3 billion that I sat on the Transportation Funding Task Force in 2008, 2009, whenever, and that same amount keeps coming up in all the different commissions that have looked at it. And that is just to maintain. That's not to improve or anything. That's just to maintain and fix what we have, but not any improvements.
And so the numbers that I saw for Washtenaw County, we get a little more than 17 million now under the current funding structure. Over the 3-year phase-in, at the end of that, we'll be at more than 29 million. So imagine what can be done with an additional $12 million on an annual basis to maintain and address the road issues in Washtenaw County.
And I assure you, for purposes of conversation, if I might, Scott, that additional funding, should it appear, will be used for maintenance of the road system. We're not talking about building new subdivision roads for development. We're talking about improving the maintenance on our existing road system. Can I ask another question?
You can.
Back to the annexation question between Dexter and Whitmore Lake. I didn't quite understand what you said. Whitmore Lake has some amount of bonded indebtedness.
Correct.
And the people in Whitmore Lake District, the current district, will be responsible to pay that off.
That is correct.
Okay. The question I heard asked was, then what operating taxes will they be paying? Will they be paying the current Dexter?
They're the same. Dexter and Whitmore are the same. So it's the
Okay.
state 6 mills for everyone, and then the non-homestead are 18 mills, but for homeowner, it's the 6 mills that goes to
Okay.
the state.
So there is,
Dexter doesn't have a sinking fund. It doesn't levy any extra to get the 300 plus more per student, so there's no change there.
okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yes?
Yeah, I didn't have a question. I wanted to say that I was at a meeting 2 days ago with Rebecca Warren, who is my state senator. I don't hear or not, but and she said that the new the first poll had come out on this, and it was at about 46%. That's not very good. Usually they go nowhere but down. So I'm not saying that to throw water on it and say this is a terrible idea. I mean, all I'm saying is, if you're behind this, you really need to get out and go for it, because it's going to be a tough haul.
Well, it's an uphill battle, and we had a legislative coffee at WISD with our school board members on Monday, and all 4 representatives that were there said there is no plan B.
That's right.
So recognize that there's no new revenue or money, and I don't know how people think and why they even believe that you can come up with 1.2 billion from existing sources when they're 400 million short in the general fund now, and they're going to be 434, whatever it is for the next fiscal year. You know, the math doesn't work based on what they've said, and so if you really want to see the roads fixed, May 5th may help us in terms of pothole season.
And the other thing about that is that it's going to come in and I've lost the train of thought. Forget it.
So anything else? I don't want to take up more of your time, but I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues and appreciate your support for public education.
Yeah. How concerned are you that if this does pass, that $200 per pupil that we're hopefully generate isn't going to be eaten up by more money going to the community colleges, because they can still use that money to fund those?
Right. So I am concerned about that. I also think that if the coalition that comes together to get it passed includes heavy involvement of our teachers and people in the public education system, that there'll be some expectation, so you might not see the full 200. And quite frankly, I wouldn't put it all personally. Where's this getting broadcasted? I wouldn't put it all in the foundation grant. When you put all the money in the foundation grant, there are public school academies that get that same increase, but they're not paying in the school retirement system, right? And so they get the benefit of more dollars per kid. we're still paying that high level for MIPSers, and we continue to see this drain on the system. So I think that there are ways that the money can be used to benefit traditional public schools. And so I think that there's an argument to be made, but I would not be telling you the truth if I didn't tell you I was a little worried.
By the way, MEA has a board of directors meeting, I think Friday, to determine if they're going to endorse.
Okay.
Endorses.
Hope they do.
Sorry, I did actually, I'm just getting old. So there's no plan B, but it's also a pretty good bet that the legislators are going to go in, if this gets voted down, and say, see, there's no will for any more taxes, we're not going to raise anything. So it's not like they're going to go back and say, gee, that failed, we're going to come up with some other solution. They're just going to say, tough luck.
And on the opposite end of that, there is rumblings that certain parties in the legislature would like to reduce the income tax down to 3.9%, which would increase the hole in the general budget and put more pressure on the school aid fund.
Hello, Kansas.
Yeah, really.
Anytime that you have questions about what's going on in Washtenaw County, WISD, or public education, if we can be of assistance, give me a call. We're happy to help. And again, thank you for the opportunity to talk with the group this evening.